Euranet Plus Panorama is a weekly review of European news broadcast by our network of EU radio stations.
Hi there, you're listening to Euranet Plus Panorama. Some 100 days after Trump's inauguration, and with Ukrainian cities under continued Russian bombardment, the image of Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky sitting face-to-face in St. Peter's Basilica struck a chord. The peaceful tone of this meeting on Saturday the 26th of April sat in sharp contrast to the aggressive tenor of the one that played out in front of the world's media at the White House in February. And afterwards, the Ukrainian president posted that it had been a historic moment, raising hopes of a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. At a meeting in Berlin on Monday, it would be fair to say that new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz sounded cautiously optimistic, cautiously being the operative word.
Wir verbinden mit der Begegnung vom vergangenen Samstag.
With last Saturday's meeting in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, we are hopeful that this could perhaps be the beginning of a serious peace process in Ukraine, one worthy of the name. But we also know that everything could look completely different tomorrow.
Dass schon morgen wieder alles ganz anders sein kann.
But as AMS reports, Merz is 100% against imposing peace on Ukraine.
Damit verträgt sich kein Diktatfrieden oder eine Unterwerfung.
This is incompatible with the dictated peace or submission to militarily created facts, especially not against the declared will of Ukraine itself. We hope and advocate that we in Europe will see it this way together, and we hope and advocate that our American partners will share this view with us Europeans in the long term.
Partner mit uns Europäern so sehen.
According to Reuters, the latest US peace proposal sets out that Ukraine would be fully reconstructed and compensated financially, although it gives no information on where this money would come from. It also states that post-war Ukraine would receive security guarantees, in this case notably from Europe. Kyiv would also regain control of the contested nuclear power plant and the now destroyed Kakhlova Dam. Meanwhile, Crimea would be ceded to Russia, and 4 other regions currently occupied by Russian forces would be de facto recognised as Russian. In addition, sanctions on Russia would be lifted, and Moscow would enjoy economic cooperation with the US in a number of sectors, including energy. While some global commentators consider the proposal pragmatic, many feel it is pretty one-sided. Perhaps not surprisingly, Lyudmila Tutieva, a Ukrainian public policy consultant who's based in France and has worked at the OECD and the UN, is in this camp. She tells EU Radio why.
Ukraine is offered no reliable security guarantees that would deter Putin from invading again. Meanwhile, Russia would obtain the lifting of sanctions and a return to business as usual with the United States.
Ivailo Kalfin is a former MEP and Bulgarian foreign minister and the current director of Eurofound, the EU's agency for the improvement of living and working conditions. He agrees that Trump's vision of peace is closer to Moscow's than to Kyiv's, as he tells BNR.
From the very beginning, from his inauguration, the US president has been doing the Russian president a lot of favors. What the Americans have proposed is, with a few exceptions, precisely what Russia is after, of course with some nuances. The Russian foreign minister says recognition of all the occupied territories, while the Americans say recognition of Crimea and leaving the others as if in a frozen conflict. But these are details. Ultimately, if this proposal is accepted, this is the Russian vision. It is not about ending the war, but freezing the conflict.
Indeed, according to this vision, peace is only possible if Ukraine accepts that territories wholly or partially annexed by Russia now belong to Moscow. At the same time, although Ukraine would be free to pursue EU membership, it would not be permitted to join NATO. This meets a key Russian demand and denies Ukraine the right to choose its own security arrangements. In a recent interview with Radio Renascença, Patriarch of Lisbon, Rui Manuel Sousa Valerio, argued that compromise does not necessarily mean defeat. This said, The former Bishop of Portugal's armed forces does not believe that Ukraine should be forced to cede territory in any peace agreement.
Para mim, é evidente, e pela formação que eu tenho e pela sensibilidade.
It's clear to me, because of the background I have and the sensitivities that drive me, that not an inch of Ukrainian land can be ceded to Russia. For me, that's a given for various reasons. Not only because the autonomous identity and independence of a sovereign nation has been called into question, but also because this would open a Pandora's box. As such, from now on, any military or political power could feel legitimized or motivated to invade any country it wanted, in the certainty a priori that sooner or later it would achieve its aims.
De que mais tarde ou mais cedo, lá está, ia alcançar aquilo que pretendia.
Under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in return for Russia and the US, among others, recognizing Ukrainian independence and the inviolability of its existing borders. Ukraine then joined the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear state. The Non-Proliferation Treaty recognizes only 5 countries as legitimate holders of nuclear weapons: China, France, Russia, the UK and the US. All others are banned from developing an arsenal, and those that have, namely India, Pakistan, Israel and North Korea, have never been parties to the treaty. Speaking to Žinių Radijas, Lithuania's Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys says that recognising Crimea as part of Russia would make past agreements not worth the paper they're written on. Other leaders in possession of territorial ambitions and a nuclear arsenal could take such a deal as carte blanche to redraw their own borders.
We have agreed to live in peace, to live within these borders, to give up the possibility of having nuclear weapons and to retain the status quo, and to pursue those who seek to acquire them. But this would destroy this order categorically.
In a Trumpist worldview, in which international institutions and international law are regarded at best as superfluous, smaller powers must either submit to their dominant neighbours or suffer the consequences. Yet if non-nuclear nations start feeling insecure and unprotected, there's genuine concern that they could launch their own programmes. Pointing out the affordability of nuclear weapons, Budrys worries that a peace deal set out along these lines would open the gates of hell.
Do you know how much the North Korean nuclear programme costs per year? Less than €1 billion. Our defence budget this year is more than €3 billion. By questioning the principles of international law, by questioning the issue of Crimean sovereignty, we're opening the gates of hell from which devils will emerge that no one will be able to put back in.
Given European misgivings, French member station EU Radio puts another question to Lyudmila Tutieva. Could and should Europe be playing a more active role in these negotiations? Tutieva notes that the Europeans have not been sitting on their hands, and that they have actively worked with Kyiv on formulating a counter-proposal to Washington's peace plan. She adds, however, that Europe seems to be struggling to find a place at the negotiating table.
European countries have shown their willingness to deploy a reassurance force in Ukraine once a ceasefire is in place. This was a very important initiative of the Coalition of the Willing that Emmanuel Macron convened a month ago in Paris. The Europeans have also worked with President Zelensky to draw up a peace plan in response to the American plan. This Euro-Ukrainian plan includes the deployment of a European contingent with US support on Ukrainian soil, the use of frozen Russian assets to finance reconstruction, the provision of security guarantees of the same strength as NATO's Article 5 without Ukraine joining NATO, and the start of territorial discussions after an unconditional ceasefire. But it is true that, for the time being, Europe has been unable to assert itself and take its place at the negotiating table to end the war in Ukraine, which indeed seems a very distant prospect.
The problem, says Bulgarian politician Ivailo Kalfin, who we also heard from earlier, is that Trump has Zelensky over a barrel.
Trump's entire behaviour right now is like that of a negotiator in the corporate world, one who is trying from a position of strength to pressure his partner and get the most out of him. I see America's threatened withdrawal from the discussions as part of the pressure to conclude the negotiations, because many questions are still unclear. If they withdraw from mediation, does it mean that they are withdrawing altogether and that they are losing interest in what is happening in Ukraine?
He goes on to spell out the relative weight of the EU and the US on Ukraine's set of kitchen scales.
Ukraine is in a very difficult situation at the moment because American support is really critical for them. As much as the EU is in solidarity and stands behind Ukraine, without American participation, it will be very difficult to maintain Ukrainian positions.
With this in mind, it's interesting to note that on Wednesday, and without too much fanfare, Washington and Kyiv closed on a much-debated minerals deal. It grants the US access to Ukraine's natural resources, including its critical minerals, and will help to finance Ukraine's reconstruction. The White House has hailed the deal as the first of its kind, and it seems that the Ukrainians were right to hold their ground too, as they managed to secure a number of concessions, making this a more favourable deal than the one initially on the table. This accord also means that a US withdrawal from supporting Ukraine's war effort is unlikely, at least in the foreseeable future. To bring this episode to a close, the Europeans have just aired an extended interview with Timothy Garton-Ash, Professor of European Studies at the University of Oxford. While Garton-Ash does not speak specifically about the US-led peace process for Ukraine, he cites the war in Ukraine and worsening transatlantic relations under Trump as two factors behind Europe finding itself, now, at a historical turning point.
We're at the beginning of something new, and I think the 3 or 4 biggest dimensions of it are: 1, attack from the east, Vladimir Putin, more than 3 years of the largest war in Europe since 1945. 2, the revelation that there's a whole world out there which is quite happy to do business with Russia, even while it's waging a neo-colonial war against Ukraine. China, India, Turkey, Brazil, South Africa, all fine going on doing business with Russia. That's a shock. 3rd, the attack from within. I mean, the populist pressures in Europe since we last spoke have, grown. I mean, think just about the amazing, shocking success of the AfD in Germany. And then the cruelest blow of all, we're under attack from the West, from Washington. And if you put together those 4 things, attack from the East, discovery we're in a post-Western world, the assault from below, and now the attack from the West, this is clearly a formative moment.
And at this formative moment, we'll sign off. Make sure you come back again next week for another trip around the Euranet Plus network.